This is Christian Voices from the Middle East, the podcast ministry of the Order of St. George the Great Martyr. I'm your host, Maxwell Marcus. Today, we're very lucky to have a renowned guest, Miceál O'Hurley, JD, PhD, an Irish and American academic, author, researcher, and former diplomat. Miceál previously worked as a development officer in the Archdiocese of New York and the Armenian Diocese of America. He recently was featured as presenter at the 35th Irish Interchurch meeting addressing the meaning of the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. In 1992, Miceál was awarded the Congressional Achievement Award. He's a Knight of the Order of St. George the Great Martyr and is a life member of the Veterans of Foreign Affairs. In 2025, Miceál was recognized for his literary and research contributions by being elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts. Dr. O'Hurley was tonsured and invested as an Archon lawkeeper of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the highest honor of the Orthodox faith for laity. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me, Maxwell. I really appreciate it.
We appreciate having you here. Thank you for coming on. So, Dr. O'Hurley, I like to begin these podcasts pretty simply. Can you tell me a bit about where you're from and how your walk of faith started?
Sure. First, call me Miceál. I come from a Roman Catholic family. We're Irish and American, which is a little different than being an Irish American. I live in Ireland with my family, my wife Oksana, who's a Ukrainian, and our children Lorcan and Blonid. They have a nice mixture of being Irish, American, and Ukrainian. But my faith experience really deepened while I was in the United States military. I started worshiping in the Eastern Rite of the Catholic Church. Some people call them the Uniots, because that was my battalion chaplain. That faith experience was profound for me. A lot of people don't understand the Catholic Church, that it's not just the Roman Catholic Church, there's the Eastern rites as well. But unfortunately, I just never felt fulfilled. And it was a great experience. And that path led me to Orthodox Christianity. I was received into the faith at St. Michael's Golden Domed Cathedral in Kyiv. And because my wife's also Ukrainian and Orthodox, it ensured that our family had one place to worship. In time, I made an acquaintance and became a member of the Order of St. George the Great Martyr. It's an organization that does great work. A lot of people are impressed by the what do you call it, the paraphernalia or the regalia that is worn, the medals, the crosses. But what drew me to the order was the incredible work they do to Christian communities throughout the Middle East and Levant, communities that are under great pressure these days. So that kind of outward expression of our Orthodox Christian faith, reaching out to our brothers and sisters throughout the Middle East and Levant, was exciting to me. I was glad to be involved, and I stay involved to this day.
That's beautiful. And I think it's very similar to the reasons that I sought out and found the Order of St. George the Great Martyr. I've been a member, I think, not as long as you have. So I would love to hear from your perspective. What's the importance of an organization like the Order of St. George the Great Martyr? Now, I say an organization like the Order, but really, I haven't found any organization like the Order of St. George the Great Martyr and the work that it does. So can you tell me a bit about its role in the Middle East and in the larger Christian world, and why we need an organization like this?
One of the things that I found particularly inviting about the Order of St. George the Great Martyr was its pan-Orthodox focus. Um, Orthodoxy, for better or worse, tends to be focused on a national basis. You have the Church of, Bulgaria, you have the Church of Romania, the Church of Greece. We have the old patriarchates. The issue of Christian unity. And I take seriously Christ's prayer for unity. And that has to begin with our experience as Orthodox Christians. Um, I saw that expression most fully realized in a volunteer capacity through the Order of St. George the Great Martyr. They do some great things with very limited resources. And I've seen it make a profound difference, whether it's been in Egypt, where the St. Catherine Monastery was under great pressure because the Egyptian government entertained a lawsuit which would have deprived that ancient monastery of its lands, its property, and its ability to function. St. George the Great Martyr helped financially. We led a delegation there, and I think it made a great difference. Luckily, the Greek government stepped in and negotiations were undertaken between Egypt and Greece, and that situation is normalizing day by day. And there was some great leadership on behalf of the Greek government. I commend them for that, and to Egypt for finding a way to find a via media, a meeting in the middle. I was in Lebanon with the Order of St. George the Great Martyr. Sadly, we passed into Syria just after a terrorist exploded uh, a vest filled with explosives after firing shots inside of Mar Elias Church, um, killing our brothers and sisters, severely damaging the church. We brought aid. We were one of the first people on the ground from the West. Father Jeremiah and I met with the clergy, met with the people. We assisted in helping with some of the families who needed to bury the dead. They were very kind to us and gave us some relics from that attack so that we would always remember and share with people here in the West that we think in the West of Christianity being stable and secure. It's anything but that. And I think anybody that's watched the news for the past several days understand that the ancient Christian communities in the Middle East, and we're talking about in Palestine, continue to come under pressure. Their property is confiscated, their property is destroyed and burned. Illegal settlements and settlers chase people from their land. So the ability to go and give witness to our faith and help our brothers and sisters was it was a moving and a spiritual experience, but it was also an experience for me to learn more. And I think the more we travel, the more we engage with our brothers and sisters throughout Orthodoxy, the better it is for our faith, for the individual churches, and I think for humanity as a whole. It's been a great experience for me.
It's wonderful to hear. Not the terrible things that have happened, but it's wonderful to hear that it's strengthened your faith and it's helped educate you in your faith deeper, and that you've been able to be of service through the Order of St. George the Great Martyr.
Let me just add this. I often go back and think upon this. It was about a year ago, and our first meeting was at the Patriarchate in Damascus. And who do I run into but the Custos of the Holy Land, a Franciscan friar, a Catholic? Um, it was witnessing the Orthodox and the Catholics, the Protestants, the Coptics, the Syriacs, the panoply of Christian confessions of faith, all of which are ancient and integral to the countries and the people in the Levant and Middle East. Seeing how they work together
Mm.
was a profoundly moving experience. I know there's a lot of people who dismiss ecumenism. I'm not talking about the ecumenism of the early 70s where people thought that they will hold hands, sing kumbaya, and drink from the same cup and water down the meaning of the sacraments. I'm talking about real ecumenism, where we get to know each other, where we share our commonalities, discuss our differences, and I think we grow from them. And seeing the people at Mar-a-Lago who only a couple of days before saw their brothers and sisters gunned down and then blown up, still worshiping in that space as a witness and a dedication that they will not be wiped from the face of the earth by hatred, but they will stand in testament to love, to the gospel message of forgiveness, and celebration of the sacraments. It re-energized my personal faith experience. So in a in a perverse way, I went there to help them with Father Jeremiah and to bring the message of hope and give some assistance um, by the head of the order of St. George the Great Martyr. But I'm the one who walked away with a more profound religious and faith experience. And I think that's the way it is when we encounter others. We find a richness in their own struggles, which helps us. And together we walk that road up to Jerusalem. Ultimately, it's the resurrection we're interested in. So there is an opportunity if people get involved, and I encourage everybody to get involved, whether it's with St. George the Great Martyr or in their parish life, with their metropolis, with their diocese and archdiocese. It makes for a much richer and profound Christian experience. We don't have this faith experience to hide it under a bushel. We want to show this light to the world. And I think we end up finding that we're enlightened by it too. It's something I'll never forget. It was a profoundly moving experience.
That sounds very profound. Um, how can people contribute to the Order of St. George the Great Martyr? How can they get involved if they're hearing this for the first time and they're hearing about the order for the first time?
I spent a lot of time raising money for the church. Um, and I've helped the Orthodox Christian community, the Armenian Apostolic Church in America, the Roman Catholic Church, the Anglicans. Uh, all of them have that same commonality of understanding that your money isn't where your mouth is, it's where your hands are. Anybody can write a check. I've often had profoundly wealthy people say, "Don't worry, I'll write a check, but don't ask me to get involved." And you kind of have to push back and say, "I can't take it on those terms," because stewardship isn't about writing a check. Stewardship is about time, talent, and treasure, and they all three go together. I wrote a book a number of years ago on the Jewish ethic of tzedakah. Um, let's call it charity for argument's sake. It's what Jesus would have been taught. And as a practice of tzedakah, it's not enough to put the charitable coin in the hand of someone in need. You have to look them in the face and you have to bless them.
Mm.
Giving is an induction into a greater experience in the life of the community and the life of Christ. Joanna, Susanna, Mary of Magdala, they all paid for the ministry. They made the arrangements in advance. And when Jesus got there and the apostles, they could preach, they could heal. So the first thing I would say is go to the Order of St. George the Great Martyr website and read. I think you'll be really surprised about all the great stuff the order does. Um, then figure out how you can best become involved. Is it a $10 a month standing order on your credit card? Is it sending a check for whatever you can send? But then look for opportunities to volunteer. Follow the activities and the missions that the order undertakes overseas. If I'm not mistaken, there's an upcoming mission opportunity. You have to pay your own way because the order's objective is to deliver aid to communities in need, not to lavish foreign trips on themselves. So there are ways to get involved, both large and small. And like the story of the widow's mite, nothing is too small. You give according to your ability. So that widow who gave the mite represented all that she had. It was truly a magnificent gift. Whereas someone who might write a check for 5,000 or 10,000 or more, it won't change whether they have steak on the dinner table or take a nice holiday or buy a new flat screen TV. But for that person who gives what they can, that is also an invitation into the ministry that Christ left to us. The church on earth is to continue the work that Christ left to us. So it's a great opportunity, and I think it can start as easily as just reading up on the order, making contact with a member, asking for mentorship, for discipleship, leadership. Stay involved in your parish community. That's vital. Without community, we're nothing. So there are great opportunities there for people to get involved. It's a great gateway to help uh, have a more deep and meaningful relationship with Christ through a volunteer opportunity. And I suggest everybody take a minute to look at that website. It's good.
Couldn't agree more. These are great words of advice. What do you notice about the community in the Middle Eastern Christian communities? I know you mentioned that there's unity amongst denominations out there. Um, is it because of persecution that brings them closer together to be able to work together and see each other? What are we lacking here in the West that keeps us from having such a strong interfaith sense of community across denominations?
Well, I think, first of all, one of the things that I just really enjoy when I go to the Patriarchate of Antioch and the liturgies, either in Greek or Arabic, I think to myself, this is an opportunity for me to get lost in the divine liturgy. Um, and I know the divine liturgy well, but there's something about hearing a language that has persevered for 1,500 years in good times and bad, that I see in these communities a determination not to be driven from their lands. We think of the Middle East as being Muslim. It's really not. It's like a stew. It has all these individual elements. There's the Syriac Christians, the Orthodox Christians, the Greeks, there's the Chalcedonians, there are so many different expressions of the Christian traditions in the Middle East. And they all learn from each other and they all strive to live up to that mandate. And it's a huge mandate Christ left to us, um, to love God and our neighbor as ourselves. It's not always easy in a region where war flames and hatreds persist over centuries, where people have such long memories. They recall the Crusades or, the sacking of Constantinople. And um, that's the past. We should understand it. We should learn from it. But it's the present in which Christ calls us to be our better selves,
Mm.
to practice that love God and your neighbor as yourself ethic. These are the first and the greatest commandments Christ taught us. I see those communities struggling towards that basic tenet. Here in the West, I fear at times we get so caught up in the culture war. We get caught up in the peripheral. Um, I think a rededication to the fundamentals of our faith are profoundly important. I love taking out my prayer rope, and you know the Jesus prayer, my Lord Jesus Christ, our Savior. Um, it's an explanation and an exclamation of what we believe. And then we say, I'm a sinner. And there's something about recommitting to that basic understanding of our faith that's important. I was thinking of Mary of Egypt today. Do you know the story of Mary of Egypt?
I've heard it. Yeah. But
She,
please share it with our viewers.
Mary of Egypt, and there'll be scholars that know far more than I, but essentially she was a hedonist. There wasn't an opportunity where she didn't celebrate her body through drinking, through promiscuity, through every kind of behavior that we would find repugnant. And then she even once went on a crusader ship trying to seduce the crusaders. Um, then she went to the Divine Liturgy. And as she walked through the door, she got pushed back. And she pushed herself forward again and got pushed back. And she realized that it wasn't the crowd pushing her back, it was her soul. And she had one of those conversion experiences that was real. And she went out on the desert and lived by herself for some 40, I think 42 years. And when she was sought out, she was sunburned. She wore what could only be described as the remnants of what were once rags. But she could recite the Gospels verbatim, although she had never read them.
Mm.
She levitated in midair in prayer. So greatly did she turn herself towards Christ and repentance that I think to myself, if someone like Mary of Egypt can have such a profoundly changing experience, there's hope for people like us, for people like me. And I'm particularly moved by it. And so those hermit experiences in the desert, um, I continue to find them personally moving. So there's something about the Middle East and Levant that continues to draw my heart there.
Wow. What would you say to individuals who are going through a season where they may be lost in their sin and they either haven't known Christ prior or they know of him and they feel a sense of shame and disassociation where they don't even feel they can approach those doors of the church, that they can't even repent? We know that this is possible to always return, to repent, to turn to the Father. But what distinguished Mary's journey from those who feel they're too far gone?
Well, I think it's important to remember that nobody is too far gone. If we go through the martyrology of the church, we see people who felt themselves to be loathsome, despicable, unworthy, and yet Christ lifted them up to a place of dignity. The whole thing about Jesus's ministry was restoring people to the center of community, to the fullness of dignity of human life. So if Christ did it for them, and that he remains in this world working for us and with us, and if we believe in the communion of saints that they're there praying and interceding for us. I think the only message I would have is you're always invited. And the only person that's excluding you is you. And I've felt that way before, where I've self-secluded. I've held myself outside. My prayer was weak. I went through the motions. I've had prayer life in the desert that lasted for a couple years at one point. Um, I'm probably not the best Christian in the world to ask this question of. I don't often get it right, but I keep trying. And I keep trying because I feel invited, not only by Christ, but by the church. And, I take seriously the act of confession in the church, not because and I know we Irish, we invented confession and it became a cruel tool at times, but the formalization of confession. But I have to tell you, there's something about reconciling yourself with Christ and the community. And again, we don't live a life with Christ alone. We live it within a community.
Mm.
Um, that's freeing. And knowing that we're continually called to holiness and to dignity. I felt myself so stupid at times that I held myself outside the church. So I guess my message to everybody is listen to your priest, listen to your deacons, listen to your bishops. They're calling you back to the community. I remember, I think it was the Franciscan friars, the Catholics, who ran this wonderful ad in the 1980s in New York. And it just said, come home for Christmas.
Mm.
It's never too late to come home. Um, in Ireland, we used to say that you can hate the church all you want, but like your mother, she's still your mother. The church will always be there for you. And
Mm.
I hope people take advantage of that.
Beautiful words. There's something that you mentioned about the Christians who have a deep fervor for their faith in the Middle East and how they're coming together amongst great difficulty. And I think a lot of us here in the West see difficulty in our lives as punishment of sorts. But I think the more we look at Christ and the path he's asked us to follow, the difficulty that we see is the cross that we bear. And it almost seems from what you're saying that the heavier that cross, the greater the difficulty, the more we're called on that walk. And those who are called deeply in their walk, the greater the difficulty they might face.
I was in Kenya once, and these women walked miles and brought these containers of water back, largely mounting them on their head and shoulders, carrying them as best they can. They did this every day, sometimes a couple times a day. I did it once, and I found it physically punishing. The thought of having to do it again and again and again, it was disturbing to me. But for people who need to live and to thrive, they do it because that's what is necessary. I can only say, as a lay observer in the Middle East and the Levant, that suffering is kind of a way of life. They've become accustomed to difficulty. And I think the real test of a person is when they meet adversity, how they deal with it.
Mm.
when I was in the army, a lot of people would bark orders and shout commands, and they knew everything. A lot of them did. But I remember this major, a high-ranking field grade officer, used to walk up and say, "How can I help?"
Hmm.
And it would reorient the way we thought, the way we reacted, the way we interacted with each other, because it was about confronting the problem in a positive manner. Life is problems. Um, in nations where minorities like Christians are persecuted, where opportunities for economic advancement are little, where the enticement to leave and go to the West, where you probably already have cousins and brothers and sisters, and abandon your homeland, that must be a profound draw. But staying and remaining and asking, how can I help? Um, I think is really a lesson we get from discipleship. Jesus went around saying, how can I help? Does someone need healed? Do I need to say a kind word to the woman at the well? Do I need to bring someone back into the fullness of community? Do I need to confront authorities who are evil? Um, I think the interesting thing I observe about people in the Middle East is there's a realistic understanding that life is not about comfort. And in the West, we often seek comfort. Um, and I think in doing so, sometimes we lose the things that are most profoundly important. There was this German philosopher right after World War II, Joseph Pepys, and he wrote this book called The Pursuit of Leisure
Hmm.
while teaching in the rubble of what had once been a university. And he talked about how the more we looked for an electric toaster, the more we looked for a comfort device, the less we spent time at leisure. In Greek, especially in ancient Greek, leisure wasn't to be not at work. Leisure was to be improving oneself, whether it's physical, whether it's the study of philosophy, sociology, politics. So I think that in the West, why we pursue leisure, and there's opportunities for leisure everywhere. Uh, in the Middle East, where those opportunities maybe aren't so great, or at least aren't celebrated as the be all and end all, there is an understanding that life can be difficult, but it's how we deal with the difficulty that makes all the difference. And so I learn even from young kids who continue to struggle in Palestine or in Jordan and Egypt, and Lebanon and Syria, to provide for their families, to get an education, to remain a functioning part of their society, even at times when their society makes it hard to fit in. Uh, I learn a great deal from that, and hopefully it makes me a better person. I've got a long way to go, but it, it's it's a nice experience to be able to observe that and try to make it part of my experience as well.
I think that posture in and of itself is good work to be doing on ourselves. Jesus teaches us to look at the children and learn from them. And it sounds like that's what you've experienced largely in visiting these places. What are
I
some
have.
lessons?
I really have.
What are some lessons that you've learned from children in particular that you see in their perspective, that you see in their fervor for Christ, that you see in their walk that has been different from what you've learned from adults?
From my own children, I see that they often have difficulty understanding what's difficult because their Legos got knocked down, and it's a terrible blow to someone who's created something. Um, they their experiences in life are limited. So they often, complain how tough things are. And I think that I've seen where children face significant austerity, hunger, food insecurity, physical insecurity. When I see kids in Palestine whose homes were destroyed and they're living under what might have been the fabric from a rice bag because you see the UN food program stamp on it. Um, and, where their bellies are so full because of hunger, and yet they still find beauty in life. I saw some birds landing and picking up seeds, and the children, they put their fist under their chins and laid down on their stomachs and just watched it because they thought it was beautiful. Um, I think there's inspiration in that. There's also shame in it that we've reduced children to that. We live in an age where we believe that we can improve the world by destroying part of it.
Hmm.
And we do need to stand up to evil. But I think we also need to understand the power of love and forgiveness and the reconciliation of human beings. And, going back to my experience at St. Catherine Monastery, on the wall, there's a document where the Prophet Muhammad printed his hand, and it's a pledge never to tax the monks, to attack St. Catherine's Monastery, or to molest them in their religious worship or in their property. That was given by the founder of Islam some 1,500 years ago. And that still exists. And Islam has acknowledged it. They have abided by it until recently. Um, it tells me that even where we think that we can't find commonality with people, we can. And I think that we need to do more seeking of commonality, and less concentrating on our differences. We can't be naive. We can't be fools. We can't be dangerous. But I do think there's a better world out there. And the Abrahamic traditions, whether it's Judaism, whether it's Christianity or Islam, we share so much scripture, so much understanding. We've shared the same land. We surely can do better finding ways to live together than live in strife.
Absolutely. From your work in diplomacy as a diplomat internationally, what would be the advice that you'd give to the everyday Western citizen who's looking to contribute to that international unity and connection beyond their experiences and those they know, those they understand? How can we bring people together from our own daily lives?
I think personal contact. When I'm in Geneva, I take every opportunity I can before a session, uh, to just introduce myself to someone, low or high, and the friendships that I've built over time. Um, some of the work I do as a mediator, a conflict resolution specialist, is often children are kidnapped from the West and taken to the Middle East because some fathers believe that they can take advantage of Sharia law. Um, and so those connections become profoundly helpful in solving these family crises because we've gotten to know each other, we've gotten to trust each other, we understand each other, We may not agree on everything. I have very good relationships with a lot of Iranian diplomats. Um, and I would say we agree on about 5% of things. But where we agree, we can do significantly good things together. And over time, that 5% becomes 10%, and who knows where it'll go from there. And I have also learned to listen to their story, their perception of me, the Westerner, the countries that I come from, our tradition as Christians. Um, so people in their everyday life need to go out and meet their neighbor, get to know them. And it
Mm.
doesn't have to start with profound, tell me about your childhood. It can be with, how do you get your roses to grow so lovely? Or, I smell this aroma when you barbecue. What is it that you're doing? And those little relationships, there was a time, um, gosh, it was about 2010, 2013. I was spending a lot of time in Syria, in Homs and Aleppo, negotiating to get Christians out of the country before things got really bad. And in the evening, the old men used to go to the square and play chess and other board games. And you'd have Muslims, Armenians, Syriacs. You would have Orthodox Christians. You have Alawites. You Muslims. They came for the enjoyment of the game and each other. Um, it showed me that we can do much better. So I think personal relationships are really important. And you don't need to be a diplomat to do that. Everybody's a diplomat. Every day you meet someone on the street, you negotiate, that you're willing to meet them as an equal, not knowing whether they've had a good day or a bad day. Um, that's an opportunity to change the world, because you never know when that relationship is going to make a difference in somebody else's life. So that would be my encouragement to others from my own humble experience.
Truly. Tell me a little bit about your work as an author and the literature that you've put together.
One of my books, The Passionate Steward, Recovering Christian Stewardship from Secular Fundraising, uh, it's almost 30 years old now. It was a bestseller. I had the privilege of lecturing at congregations, large and small, all across the United States, Canada, the UK, in Germany, and the Netherlands, and in Africa. Um, I really wanted us to take a look at how we fundraise. We're really good at making stained glass windows and putting the names of very wealthy people in them. And we may or may never see them at worship services again, the divine liturgy, at prayer. Um, but we don't often celebrate the women who clean the church, the men who polish the benches, the people who tend the garden, who show up each and every week and put in what few coins they have, that pruta, that meaningless coin, to keep the church going. The book explores, giving patterns in the United States, and it shows in Appalachia and parts of isolated parts of America in the South or Midwest, that are considered poor. Those people give a higher percentage of their income than other places in America. Um, the church will always need resources. And, if someone wants to give $1 million, great. Um, but we also need to remember that stewardship, caring for the earth that God gave us, is more than writing checks. It's about getting involved. It's about giving your talent. If you're an accountant, help people at the church. If you are a nurse, a paramedic, volunteer your time in a community-based activity. There's all kind of things you can do. So I've tried to make my work in practical theology something important. And when I've had the opportunity, I've done some deep dives into the polity in Middle Byzantium, what we call the Eastern Roman Empire. They didn't know themselves as Byzantines. They spoke Greek, but they called themselves Romans. There's a history there. And that was an exploration of our history to help me understand the Middle East better. I took a look at tzedakah, the charitable ethic of giving and kindness and fidelity in Judaism. And most recently, my wife and I, Oksana Shadrina, wrote a book called Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, The Russian Orthodox Church's Threat to European Security and Democracy. I know it sounds like, oh, how dare you attack another Orthodox Christian community? I find profound beauty in Russian Orthodoxy. There are some elements of it that I just am fascinated by, that I find spiritually fulfilling and uplifting. But I do have a problem with a church who orients itself to the benefit of the state at the expense of the gospel. So when we have a patriarch like Kirill preaching a holy war, something that does not exist in Christianity, certainly not in Orthodoxy, it concerns me. When I see priests being punished for not reciting the prayer of the Holy Rus, praying for Russian state victory as opposed to the victory of the cross and resurrection, I get concerned. When I see the dozens, if not hundreds of clergy caught up in espionage in Europe, or at JFK, where they show someone from the Moscow Patriarchate showed up, his computer was seized, and they had collected audio compromat by wiretapping clergy in the United States and elsewhere so they could shame them for coercion later on. I no longer see a recognizable church. What I see is the Russian Orthodox Church having given itself over to the Ruski Mir, the Russian world, trying to establish itself as the third Rome after the fall of Rome. Then there was Constantinople. Moscow now sees itself as the center of Christianity and traditional values. And yet I think we all read the stories on an ongoing basis that when you fall out of favor with the Kremlin, you end up falling out of a window. That's not a Christian ethic. I don't see Vladimir Putin as the defender of traditional Christian values. I see him as an agent of death, someone who can't stand free speech, who has told other faith communities, you're no longer able to worship. And yet at the same time, we continue to hear this Russian mantra about how they're persecuted and how the Ukrainian Orthodox Church related to the Moscow Patriarchate is persecuted. You know, the last chapter, the epilogue in our book, we explore the American Revolution. You had Church of England clergy who took an oath of allegiance to the head of the Church of England, the King of England. So they were turning in American patriots who were put to death, whose homes were confiscated and burned, whose crops were stolen, simply because they wanted independence and democracy. When the war ended, the Church of England was disestablished in America. That's no different than what Ukraine wants to do with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate. They don't want to abolish Orthodoxy. That's a lie. That's propaganda. They want to stop Russian influence in their country, where Russian Orthodox clergy and some of the Ukrainian Orthodox clergy who are pro-Russian have used the bell towers to direct mortar and artillery fire on innocent civilians. who have an occupation regime that engaged in brutal murder. I was at Bucha. I walked amongst the dead bodies before we could bury them. I held blankets that were funeral shrouds for civilians. I don't understand a Russian Orthodox Church who endorses the execution of civilians, the murder and rape of elderly women and children, or the abduction of thousands of children who were then housed in Russian Orthodox schools, camps, and buildings throughout Russia, for which the Russian Orthodox Church is paid. I can't find Christ in that. So I hope our Russian Orthodox brothers and sisters return to a truly Orthodox faith, where the gospel guides us, not the cult of personality of Vladimir Putin or Patriarch Kirill. And I think it's important that Europe understands, and I hope America understands what's really going on. I hope our book gives a history, some context, cites some examples, and it's meant to be a primer to help people think for themselves. Because these journalists who are defending Russia by claiming the Orthodox Church is persecuted and that the Orthodox Church of Ukraine are self-ordained people, there's no such thing. They're really doing a disservice to the truth, which, should concern us as Christians, and they're injuring orthodoxy. And I would say to the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, ROKOR, who reunited with Moscow. I mean, most Americans don't understand that to be a ROKOR bishop in America, it has to be approved by the Patriarch of Moscow. I think we should be concerned, but more concerned, you're probably too young to remember, but we had an Orthodox bishop of America. His name was Yakovos in the 1960s. And he marched with the civil rights marchers. He stood up for the poor, for people who were subjected to injustice. And yet today, too often in Orthodoxy, even after the Russians destroyed the Church of the Domitian in Kiev at the Percheslavra, silence. They're quiet when it comes to moral or practical issues of evil. And I think those of us who choose to stay quiet will have to answer most to Christ when we know what the church has taught. We know about love and forgiveness. We know about the evils of war. And yet silence too often pervades. So I'm hoping our work there will help people think critically and differently, not to shame our Russian Orthodox brothers and sisters, but to help everybody think about how they can best lead a Christ-like life. That theosis where, we go from, the idea that Christ became man so that man might become God. There is a path. And what the Russian Orthodox Church is doing at the moment isn't it. So that's our latest work. Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, the Russian Orthodox Church's threat to European security and democracy. Columbia University Press and I Bid 'em here in Europe are our publishers. It's available in most major booksellers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I hope you buy a copy and read it.
We'll make sure to take a look at it. Absolutely. I think a lot of what you've mentioned in the problems that we're seeing in Russia aren't exclusive to Russian Orthodoxy, I've seen a lot of endless good in Russian Orthodox Christians. I think what we're kind of noticing, especially in the Middle East as well, is when governments get involved in religion and they use it as a weapon against the people who try to live godly lives and good lives, virtuous lives in that religion. I think in my other interviews where we've discussed the problems in the Holy Land in the Middle East, we've seen that there are so many good Jewish people in the Holy Land who love their brothers and sisters across Abrahamic religions. I've met a few myself. And it's when oppressive governments get involved and start to use a heavy hand to direct those groups and organizations through fear, that we see a shift in that societal consciousness. What would be some advice, if we can give any, towards people in identifying the distinction between government and religion, even here in America? And how can we shine a light on that distinction in the Middle East to show people that there is still so much goodness across different Abrahamic faiths out there? There's still a lot of goodness in the people out there, and there is a hope for unity amongst people and a love that can be shared across their organizations and groups and religions.
Well, first, I'd say that Americans are uniquely endowed with a body of literature that grew out of democracy, that's very supportive of religious freedom. Thomas Jefferson is often remembered for the Declaration of Independence, probably one of the most profound works of political prose that will ever be written. Right up there with the Magna Carta, the rights of man in France. It's an incredible work. But he was most proud, and he wanted his epitaph to be that he was the writer of the Virginia Statute on religious freedom. So Americans can look at their foundational documents and find that an orthodoxy has embraced this idea of symphonia, where government and the church work in concert for the good of the people. But that doesn't mean that the church becomes an agent of the state. And I think, people are upset today because the church is in decline. The first decline in the church happened the day Christ rose. The women were at the grave and all the men had ran away. But the church grew again. It happens in cycles. I think that the issue of church and state is a bit different in the Middle East because they don't have a tradition of democracy. But I can put my hand up and say that today I watched the news. Patriarch Theophilus of Alexandria and Cardinal Pizzabali went on a mission together. So you have a Catholic and an Orthodox leadership working together to address some of the issues that government mismanagement has caused people to suffer. When I go to Syria, it's not always safe, but I find the Syrian government always assures my safety, even though they know my mission might be 100% Christian or humanitarian. We can work with these governments. They can respect our religious tradition. This idea of fear that, led to the closing of Christian schools, or to Muslim schools, or, the Baha'i faith, or, different faith traditions. We can move beyond that. And I would say we have to keep working at it. And if it can't be accomplished today, tomorrow's another day. This is the task before us, to make a better world. The Jews would call it tikkun olam, to perfect a broken world. I think it's an ethic we could all learn from.
I would agree with you. You've done a great job in your life of bringing your Christian fervor and faith into your occupation, into your work. You've made it a central theme amongst your literary work, your diplomacy. I think a lot of people would like to bring their faith, bring their love for God, bring their pursuit of Christ into their work across many different jobs. And you spoke on this a little bit earlier, but I'd really like to kind of dive into this and hear what your thoughts are and some advice that you might have into bringing those two together. And what did that first look like for you when you recognized that you wanted to bring your faith deeply into your occupation, your vocation?
I've been privileged to been awarded many honors, achieve some credentials. I was made an Archon of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. It's the highest honor the Orthodox Church can bestow a civilian, a layperson. And I guess the important thing for me is knowing that I don't mean to be dismissive, but those things in €2.50 gets me a cup of coffee. Being an Archon, and let me explain what an Archon is. They were the highest advisors in the Roman and Byzantine empires. It literally means my lord. And when the Ottoman Turks were sacking Constantinople, the emperor entrusted the orders of the Archons to the Orthodox Church, which would live on. So rather than being called my lord, which we usually find associated with British knighthoods, when I was tonsured and commissioned an Archon, it was a task of service. So I would say to all people of faith who want to live it in their workplace, first of all, if you're ordained or commissioned or have a title or an honor, those things are meaningless. It's what you do that's important. It's nice when someone says Your Excellency or My Lord or extends to you a courtesy title, but it's much better when they say, I would like to work with you. So understanding servant leadership is an important thing, living it in your workplace. And knowing that you're going to fail. You're not a perfect model. But in as much as the Catholics would say that imitatio Christi, the imitation of Christ, that we learn to be patient, to be forgiving, to teach when we can, to comfort whenever possible, that's leadership. The idea of leadership isn't to gain more followers. It's to produce more leaders. the church grew because the apostles and Polycarp, the rest of the early saints, they understood it was about service. It was about witness. So I would say to people, if you want to get involved and bring your faith experience into the world, great. Don't push it down someone's throat. Try to be the best witness you can be. Admit your faults, admit your shortcomings, and try to be a servant leader. And you'll know you're successful when you see other people become servant leaders. We have all kinds of chiefs, but we don't always have all kinds of people who make things possible. So that would be my encouragement.
Very well put. And it's scripturally sound. Christ tells us if you seek to lead, serve, because, well, the God of the universe came here to serve. And that's I think that's very close to what you're saying here. So
Can I just follow up on that?
please.
Be prepared to suffer. Christ ministry. I mean, you had the wedding in Cana where he had a good time, where he would meet his friends, when he would embrace his mother, family. Keep your family at the center of your life. But Christ's ministry often was met with ridicule, derision, persecution, pain, suffering. So, as long as you understand that being a servant carries a cost, I'd encourage everybody to try it. I remember when I was doing work with Cardinal O'Connor, the Roman Catholic Archbishop of New York, I would complain about how badly we were paid. And he'd say, oh, yeah, the pay is terrible, but the death benefits are great. So we have to keep in focus, what our ultimate goal is. And if it's redemption and the kingdom of God, it's all worth it.
Very insightful. Something to think about. Something that I like to ask on these podcasts. I like to finish the podcast on a high note. I always ask my guests if they've ever experienced what they would call a miracle. Now, it could be big, it could be small and mundane, but our faith is centered around the greatest miracle. And our God did so many miracles when he was here as a man. And so, yeah, I'd like to ask, have you ever experienced what you would consider a miracle in your life?
When I realized that Christ loved me, flaws and all, I found that miraculous. When I experienced Oksana's love, in Hebrew we would say ahyevo, it's a special kind of love, constant attentiveness to other and unbreakable bonds of loyalty. It's usually reserved for God. That I experienced that in our marriage, as defective as I am, it's a miracle. My children were miracles. I've seen 7 wars, either as a soldier, as a journalist, or as a diplomat. I've seen ugliness that I'll probably never escape, and I would pray that no one experiences or sees. And in the depths of that misery, I still found that people could experience love, kindness, forgiveness. When you see a battlefield torn up and you see a little flower push its way into the sunlight, it is that promise that tomorrow is another day. I find that miraculous. Have I ever seen the lame healed or the dead rise or nothing so profound? But I hope that I can recognize the miracles that are everyday life. If I didn't, I would find life profoundly hard. And I think back, I had a lecturer at university, Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, about finding a reason to go on while he was in a Nazi death camp, and knowing that his wife and his family were murdered, his life's work destroyed, his manuscript, his research, that he still recognized that when we find something worthwhile, and when we can name it as beauty, it's a miracle enough for me. It was for him. And I would encourage most people to recognize all the beauty and miracles in their daily life. It keeps me going. So I guess that would be my answer.
What a lovely answer. And I think it's extremely profound. It calls back to what you were saying earlier about the children who were starving, watching birds eat seeds and seeing the miracles in their daily lives. And I was going to ask you prior to this question, because you mentioned that if you seek to serve, be prepared to suffer. I was going to ask you, what are the tools that we have to help us through that suffering? And I think you just answered that question in a very profound way, that we're called to see the miracles in our everyday lives, where the secular world has told us to overlook these things that may seem so small. They're genuinely not. They're the beauty of our world and evidence of God's love.
I've been to shrines all over the world, Catholic and Orthodox. I know everybody wants to see the home run hit. They want to see the lame walk, the blind see, the deaf hear. I guess my belief, my faith, that Christ calls us all to a relationship with him and the church he left on earth. And the idea of the communion of saints, you know, I get lost sometimes thinking about the domes inside of our church and how, the candelabra, they represent the lights of the stars and the heavens and the divine liturgy. And when I get lost in all of that, and I'm mystically united with all of the faithful that came before me, I feel such a profound sense of wonder and gratitude that maybe it was my, before I became Orthodox, I said I was Catholic. My Catholic guilt makes me think I'm not worthy. But it's the idea that I'm invited into that. And that's such a profoundly consoling experience. I want to share it with others. And so, this idea that I'm saved by faith and faith alone, I have a personal relationship with Jesus. What good is that without brotherhood and sisterhood? What good is that without my faith experience calling me to go out and do something good every day? Don't get me wrong. I wish I could have $1 billion so I could solve people's hunger. And I wish I could do something profound and get my name on a wall. But it's enough for me. Maybe I made somebody that was sad smile, or I contributed to an organization like the Order of St. George the Great Martyr, who gives scholarships, who helps repair churches, who does 100 little and big things all at the same time without looking for glory. And I think if the order could raise money without having a website to talk about the things they do, they would do that, because it's not about the glory. It's about extending that franchise of love and opportunity to live more fully in the life that Christ intended for us. That makes things worthwhile. So I guess I'm tickled to have the good fortune to be an Archon, to be a member of the Royal Society for the Arts, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, to the Order of St. George the Great Martyr, to be a member of my local parish, to be a member of my family and my local community. Um, so I have to look for ways to serve in which I can. They may never be memorable, but I have to think that my children will someday, God willing, tell their children, your grandfather and grandmother used to do these things to make people's lives better. And that becomes an ethic that we pass on generation after generation. Wealth is great, but service. Service changes people's lives. Wealth comes and goes. Ask anybody who's been rich and poor. Empires rise and fall. But lives can be eternal. So I think there's a great opportunity for everybody. And, I hope I do a better job of being worthy of it.
Beautifully put. And luckily, our worth and our value was determined by the price that was paid for us. And Christ determined that for us. Now it's just our job to do good by him. And it seems like you're doing your best. And as far as contributions go, I want to thank you for your contribution here on this podcast today. I will certainly remember it. And I know our listeners will too.
I want to say to all the listeners, those of you who have contributed or about to contribute, your gifts made some of the ministry that I've done possible. And if it wasn't me, it'd have been some other decent person. And I never did anything by myself. Constantine, our the head of the order, he's a great leader because he doesn't seek to be at the front of every charge. He is very adept at finding the right person for the right mission. Or like when I went to Syria with Father Jeremiah, or Lebanon, or, our time in the desert at St. Catherine. Um, Everybody has a role to play. And, maybe you're housebound, or maybe you're raising small children, or maybe you're enmeshed in your career. You can still do something in your local parish with the Order of St. George the Great Martyr, in civic society, in your workplace. Do something. I guess that's the best advice I have to offer.
That's great advice. Thank you, Miceál. Really appreciate
Anytime.
it.
Thank you. And listen, I really appreciate you listening to me. I drone on rather long, but I had an opportunity to share, and I would really look forward to hearing more of your podcast when other people that do things can share what they do, because I always look to learn. Thank you.
Absolutely. I look forward to hearing every guest that we have, and this has been an honor and a privilege for me. So thank you again.
Thank you.
This has been Christian Voices from the Middle East, podcast ministry of the Order of St. George the Great Martyr. I'm your host, Maxwell Marcus. We're grateful to have you here listening to our guest, Dr. Miceál O'Hurley. Thank you all for listening, and God be with you.